Namaskar and welcome to this interview series in the fourth edition of Expert Speak, a program initiated by the Asian Institute of Diplomacy and International Affairs, or AIDA, in 2020. AIDA is a non-partisan think tank that looks into the developments within the geopolitical, economic, and security landscape in the Himalayan region, focusing on South Asia. As a platform, Expert Speak seeks to invite scholars, policy experts, and practitioners for interviews to bring in their experience and share their knowledge on a particular theme or issue that is significant within the current trends of international relations. Today's interview is going to be incredibly interesting and slightly different, as it is not just centered on understanding the trends, thematic issue or topic. It is about the experiences and insights of a veteran in his craft. We will be talking about Nepal's foreign policy and the state's positioning both within the region and beyond, but what we will also be looking into are the institutional factors that influence interests and perceptions when crafting policy decisions and vice versa. The speaker we have with us today has always been eloquent in his approach to such matters, and many may have also already have had the opportunity to listen to him and to read his writings recently. I've had the pleasure to have conversed with him before, and the experience was intellectually invigorating. So it is with genuine pleasure that I am introducing our expert for the day. Former ambassador, Mr. Prakash Kumar Suvedi, holds an MA in economics from Tribhuvan University and an MA in international relations from the International University in Japan. He is the current executive director of the Institute of Foreign Affairs, or better known as IFA, and carries a long history of foreign service in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, or MoFA. Having worked within various capacities in the institution, including serving in Nepal's embassies in Moscow, Riyadh, and Copenhagen since the late 80s, he became the permanent representative to United Nations and other international organizations in Vienna in 2016, simultaneously serving as Nepal's ambassador to Austria. So while in Vienna, he was essentially wearing two hats, one of an ambassador and the other as a permanent representative. Welcome, sir, to Expert Speak. We are very glad to have you here with us.
Thank you very much, Swetaji, for the kind introduction. Maybe I don't deserve some of the adjectives you put before my name, but thank you very much. And it's always a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you so much, sir. It is genuinely a pleasure to have you with us. So to start off the interview, I want to begin by sort of touching on the bureaucratic molds and structures of interest when looking into foreign policy and decision-making. So starting off, you entered the Foreign Service in the late 80s. And since then, several significant changes have been marked within the political structures of the country. That includes the bureaucratic structures as well, especially with the introduction of the Civil Service Act in 1993 that added on to the act that was first promulgated in the 50s, which post-Panchayat really shaped the bureaucracy as we know it today. And this was true for MoFA as well. As someone who dedicated decades of his life to foreign service, how did you perceive these changes in the context of Nepal's projection of its influence through its foreign policy and the institutional role of MoFA within it all?
Well, Swetaji, it's a very interesting question because it gives me opportunity to go back to my youth. The change of 1990 happened just after, almost immediately after I joined the Foreign Service. In fact, immediately after I joined the Foreign Service, we experienced this long economic embargo or economic difficulties with India, and that all culminated into some internal change. But this type of political change are part of human life, part of history. What I personally feel is that the change of 2007, 2007 साल को परिवर्तन, was profound change in Nepal's polity, and other changes are all based upon, or they have their foundation upon the change of 2007, 1950. So in that sense, I look at the change of the 1990 from that perspective. And as you say that changes in foreign policy, yes, it has in foreign policy front, it has much more profound change in the sense that the change of 1990 was preceded by a global change. The socialistic bloc had been dismantled in Europe, and soon we will see the dismantling of the Soviet Union. In 1990, we were all brushing towards a unipolar world. So in the foreign policy front, it was a much larger change than the change in the domestic polity. And also one thing that in the domestic system we have to we realize is that coming away from the partyless panchayat system to the multi-party system, we suddenly found multiple actors working in our politics, leading our political system. And those those multiple actors have also multiple view on the foreign affairs of the global order. So those changes are much more profound than the internal polity, I think. Well, looking back, we might have reservations that we could not do that, if we couldn't do that, or we should have done in that way. But what I think is that our policy world has managed the changes a much better way. So, and you talked about the civil service, the changes in the civil service following the 1990 change. In my personal view, though there were attempts to make change in the structure of the civil service, neither the political system, political leaders, nor the new Civil Service Act made any attempt to change the character of the civil service in the sense that the relationship between civil service and the larger society, it remained the same. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Oh, that's very interesting. And I think I want to sort of delve deeper into this because, as you've mentioned, there were many actors that were involved when you look at that time period who were sort of crafting their own agendas when devising foreign policy narratives. But you also hinted towards the fact that there was a larger scope of interest as well, right? Like the larger political worldview and the larger ideological worldview were also shaping these countries' interests, and they're stepping into the larger stage, so to speak. So how did you perceive these political or ideological worldviews impacting Nepal's foreign policy practice during the early stages of your career?
Yeah, as we discussed, 1990 introduced multiple actors in Nepal's domestic politics. And also the leaders were influential in our foreign policy and foreign affairs. But as you talked about political and ideological worldviews impacting our practices, what I think is that it is true then and it's true now. Those ideological worldviews are felt more on the level of rhetoric than on the level of policy and practices. It is true then and it's true now.
Okay, so that's a very interesting take. So as you previously spoke, when you entered the Foreign Service in the 80s, you worked within various capacities, right? So you were there as a first secretary in Moscow in the late 90s, then you moved into Riyadh in the early 2000s, and then on to Copenhagen. So it would be interesting to learn from your experience before you became a consummate, right? Before you actually became the veteran that you are now, before you became an ambassador. And since as mentioned before, you did sort of spend these like invaluable years within these postings, if you could just shed some light on what those years contributed in terms of your understanding of the diplomatic practices and influence that state representatives wield in foreign lands. And also as a follow-up, after you became an ambassador, did your perception change from those years when you were serving in the state embassies before?
It's an interesting question, and it really asks me to look back into my career. And my postings were interesting, Moscow and Riyadh. I did Moscow from 1995 to 1999, and Riyadh from 2005 to 2008. And when people used to ask me, what is your specialty in the foreign ministry, I used to jokingly tell that I'm a horse weather specialist, living in from -50 to +55. That's it. But also, they gave me very distinct knowledge about the conduct of foreign policy, especially Moscow and Riyadh, especially Russia and Saudi Arabia. These are the countries larger countries, we are determined to leave a rather distinct footprint in the global order. Denmark, though, is not a large country, through its unique policy outlook, they are also uh, trying to build distinct personality, international personality. During my tenure in Moscow from 95 to 99, Russian economy was undergoing a difficult period after the dissolution of the Soviet Union. Even then, what I see that they were maintaining very robust foreign policy mechanism. Their foreign policy institutions were very strong, very robust. The excuse that we often listen in Nepal that because we are undergoing economic difficulties, then we also had to cut the resources at the foreign policy front. And that is not true. When I look back at Russia in the 1990s, even though their economy was going through difficult phase, they were still maintaining a strong diplomatic mechanism and diplomatic presence that commensurate the size, the aspiration of the country. Now coming to protocol, certain protocol practices in the world are global, but those global characters of the protocol underpin all the protocol practices that are done. But then many national practices are informed by the nation's history, nation's culture, etc. Nepal being the oldest nation state in South Asia. We have our own practices, we have our own cultural traditions. So our protocols are also informed by those practices. Sometimes often people talk about, is this protocol correct in terms of protocol? Yes, it is correct in terms of protocol because we have distinct culture, distinct culture of running the government uh, and dealing with the foreigners. And coming to your another question, you said that what was my experience or understanding regarding the state representatives held in foreign lands, how much power they held in foreign land. What I think is that sometimes we think in this way because unfortunately in Nepal, we tend to believe that the diplomats have to wield power in the foreign land because we are witnessing certain actors in Nepal crossing the boundary or overstepping the boundary. Because this thing in Nepal, what is happening in Nepal, the actors often overstepping the boundaries have informed our belief that diplomats wield a lot of power. It is not that. What diplomats must be able to do is to negotiate the interest of its country while respecting the interest of the host country. So you said that what would be my interesting observation as when I became ambassador apart from this? Not much. I mean, for me, it was the continuation of my journey in the foreign service. But I have to say that I have two unique experiences as ambassador. The first one is that I was assigned to establish a new mission, that too in a very vibrant capital like Vienna. At the initial months, the logistic challenge was there. But then I think that I could fulfill all the logistic tasks within 6 months of my going there. We are well established within 6 months. Then they come the more profound challenge of relinking Nepal with the agendas of United Nations and other organizations in Vienna. When I went to Vienna and I started working there, I realized that we came there very, very late. Why didn't we open a mission in Vienna in 70s or 80s when we opened one in Geneva? We should have opened then. Still today, people are talking that, okay, Nepal has made a wrong decision by opening a mission in Vienna. Then I just often say that they have not understood the significance of the agendas that are discussed in Vienna or the issues that are born in Vienna. Just I'll give you two examples, and I've written about those also. Because we are disconnected from Vienna's agendas, discussions that happen in Vienna. We don't understand those issues properly in Nepal. I've been constantly maintaining that our nation, our society is involved in this very important debate in cannabis legalization without properly considering or understanding the international debate, the international context. Because we were not in Vienna for a long time, we could not internalize those debate. Second thing is that the peaceful use of nuclear technology, or as in the NPT's language, the peaceful use of the nuclear energy is the most misunderstood dimension of disarmament diplomacy in Nepal. Even senior people, intellectuals, whenever we talk about nuclear energy, tend to believe that we are talking about nuclear bomb. So this lack of clarity regarding these important issues is not a desirable situation. We went to Vienna rather late, but now we should, the society, even my foreign ministry should gear up to better understand and better take more ownership of the Vienna agenda.
Definitely, sir. You've raised some very interesting points, some very pertinent points, actually. But speaking of clarity on issues, you've also spoken on other contemporary issues that have impacted Nepal and that stand as significant issues for Nepal, including labor migration, South Asian regionalism, and the evolving geopolitical landscape. So I'll sort of split up my question and shift gears a bit. Moving into your more scholarly pursuits, you've written about these issues as well, and they're available on LinkedIn. Like the short notes that you've made, they're very insightful, but I want to sort of go into it a bit more. So I want to lead with labor migration because this is an issue you've been speaking about for a very long time. So the issue surrounding it, in a post, you argued that labor migration has become a security issue for Nepal. So you've brought it into a security dimension. And though you have briefly discussed the idea, it would be interesting if you could expand on how the scope of security is expanding for the state when looking at the issue of migration today.
Thank you, Swetaji. This is something that I really love to talk always. And first, let me clarify, I don't consider myself a scholar. I come from a policy world and I have interest in certain aspects, certain areas of our international relations and foreign affairs. Yes, I have been a student of international relations, so I can relate more with the scholars like you than many people from the policy world. Well, I went to Riyadh in 2005, and that was the first introduction to me with the world of foreign employment or labor migration. I realized immediately after reaching there how foreign employment is contributing to the fragmentation of the family. Husband and wife are not living together. Many children are being raised without a father, without a mother, and in several cases without both parents. This fragmentation of family ultimately constitutes a large societal security issue for our country. It is deep. If we do proper research, it has put really bad strain on our societal fabric. Similarly, then I slowly started realizing while I was in Riyadh, we talk about the contribution of remittance to our economy. Okay, at the face value, it is okay. But our youths, a lot of our youths, very productive in the very productive age are going in the foreign employment and earning very, very meager salary. When I was in Riyadh, generally a Nepali would earn 400 riyals per month. And at that time, the rate of riyal was about 20, 21, 22 rupees. So a high migration cost, dalal commission and all these things is very high. Nepal, maybe unfortunately, has one of the highest migration cost because of the bad governance. They earn so meager amount of money. Though yes, when we talk about the number, the figure of remittance, it is high. But I always wonder how much national productivity has been lost domestically due to the migration of such large number of youths. Have we ever talked? This opportunity cost, in fact, constitutes a challenge of economic security to our country. But before, we talk about this economic cost or economic security, I call upon the economists to really elaborate on this point and properly quantify the productivity loss we have in Nepal because of the outward migration of our youth population. There are other way also of looking into this and explaining the security dimension of labor migration. One thing is that the labor migration governance around the world is that the labor sending country, which are comparatively poorer like Nepal, have explicitly or implicitly agreed on a trade-off. They have agreed to voluntarily forego many of the rights of its citizens so that the smooth flow of remittance is ensured. We often talk about the rights of our labor force abroad. Yes, we have to work to protect the right of the people, but the laborers, whoever go in the foreign employment, the first thing is that they agree not to bring their spouse or their family with them. Living with the family is the first point of the human rights. Yes, this whole regime, is designed in such a way that the sending country have agreed on this unfortunate trade-off. So this harsh reality has to be understood and accepted before we talk about foreign employment and labor migration. Without understanding this harsh reality, what I feel is that the labor discourse, the migration discourse in Nepal had many missing links. Conceptually, let me say one thing. If we can describe this trade-off, or if we try to explain this trade-off as a spectrum and place different countries in the different places in this spectrum, we have foregone our rights for the economic advantage. The receiving countries have ensured the smooth flow of remittance, but they are getting cheap labor and the laborers without much of the social and political rights. If we just try to explain everything in this spectrum, now I come back to you, Swetaji, and ask you, who has spent so much of your valuable time studying and teaching the theories of international relations. Does this way of looking, that placing country into this spectrum, fits into that neo-realist framework of relative distribution of power? So this is the security framework that I am looking at. So I'm not a scholar. I cannot explain everything in the language of the scholars, but this is how I'm looking at things. And let me also talk about another issue. Now, security of our citizens residing in foreign land has posed immense challenge to our nation, to our government. This is also a security issue for the country. And also surrounding this labor migration, and more because of the student migration, there is an often repeated narrative that we listen in this country. Okay, this country is doomed. They say khattam sa. So this narrative is also, a real security issue for our country. We have to work to defeat this narrative. So finally, I would like to say, whenever we say that we want to elevate any issue to the level of national security debate, we are not portraying the thing in negative light. I'm not saying that, okay, labor migration is bad, student migration is bad. No, I'm not saying. Having spent so much of my life, thanks to my career in a foreign country, not only because of the career, I have spent 4 years in foreign land as a student. So I know the advantage of being in a foreign country, dealing with another culture, how much it contributes to enrich you spiritually, socially, culturally. I know. I'm always happy when young people are moving. But when we securitize any issue that help us to understand the issue properly, adapt appropriate discourse, and devise appropriate policy to deal with it.
Thank you so much for putting it that way. I think narrative structuring and restructuring are important things that we need to understand when we're discussing such issues that hold so many different meanings to so many different people and require so many different groups to work together to solve such issues. And people rarely look at the flip side of the remittance coin when discussing about labor migration in Nepal. So I think it's a very important point that you raised. Um, sort of moving into another part of your, well, you say you aren't a scholar, but I think you have written incredible um, notes on issues that are being discussed by scholars today in Nepal, one of which is regionalism. You've mentioned something very interesting when you sort of highlighted the problem of envisioning an integrated South Asian region in the current situation where some states are facing internal discord, and this adds on to the security issue as well, right? How do you perceive the gaps and challenges when devising an integrated South Asian narrative?
As a practitioner, I was involved in South Asian affairs for really long, for a very junior officer to the head of the division. And in these long years, I've witnessed the evolution and the consolidation of South Asian identity across the country. A Pakistani, a Sri Lankan, an Indian, Bangladeshi, a Nepali, or whoever it is, are as much South Asian as anybody else is today. So this South Asian identity is something very, very real. Though I tend to say that the South Asian identity for a country like Nepal is a constructed identity. Because I was small child growing up, we used to listen that Hamile Himal Uthayo, Asia ko Majama. We always thought that we are in the Central Asia. But now we really call ourselves South Asia. Though it is a constructed identity, but the South Asian identity is a real thing. And it is not only for Nepal, but for all the countries who are in South. But regionalism today is experiencing a setback in South Asia, as we all know. It is because we fail to devise appropriate institutional mechanism, or rather, the institution that we put place could not evolve with time. So, if regionalism has some issue, some problem in South Asia, though it is a cliche to talk, but the only answer is the better South Asian regionalism. You mentioned internal discord in some countries of South Asia. As I just said, though SARC helped in consolidating a common South Asian identity, its process, the SARC process, could not fulfill our desire of a peaceful and prosperous South Asia. There is a gap. Now, if the internal discord can be related to this shortcoming of South Asian regionalism, it calls for further consolidation of our institutions and further deepening of our regional process. And if the internal discord cannot be related to this this shortcoming of South Asian regionalism, then they should not serve as a pretext to dismiss South Asian regionalism.
Definitely. I think that's a very unique way of like looking at how South Asia has been quote unquote functioning today. That's a very interesting thing. You mentioned institutions, and I'll sort of round up the institutional aspect of it in a more domestic scenario. In recent years, there has been a sentiment across political spectrums when looking at MoFA's role that it needs to be revised, especially with federalism now in full effect as well. Now that the geopolitical competition is increasing in the global and regional space, what would be your opinion on how MoFA's role should be perceived in the days forward, taking into consideration the issues that you raised today?
MoFA's role, or rather its institutional strength and characters, should be constantly revised. We live in a very dynamic world, and it should be constantly revised. You brought in two very interesting issues, federalism and the geopolitics. What are the impacts of our federal structure into our foreign affairs? I don't talk about foreign policy. Foreign policy is the domain of the federal or central government. But there are certain issues that can be the domain of our provinces or states. Also in India, we talk about competitive federalism, where many chief ministers starting from 90s started reaching out to the larger world for technology, for investment. So those things can be true here also. Technology, investment, tourism promotion. We just talked about labor things. People from all parts of Nepal are working in the foreign land. And the local politicians have genuine, legitimate interest about the welfare of those people. So how we will manage these concerns of the local or provincial level officials into these issues of foreign investment, for tourists, foreign technology, foreign employment has to be looked into from a proper perspective, but without challenging the prerogative of the central government to formulate the foreign policy and security policy. As far as geopolitical thing is concerned, yes, it is true that the geopolitical competition, as you put it, is happening very near to our country, in our vicinity. But I have always found that our policy world has better managed it in comparison to the intellectuals and public media. Our policy world is far less constricted by this geopolitical development than the discourse of our intellectuals or media soldiers. And also something, Swetaji, I often wonder, if we decide to disregard for a single day the intellectual bickerings that is happening in the social media, do we still find this geopolitical competition as severe, as immediate as we find? So many things are the construct of our popular narrative. And what I think is that our policy world has managed it far better.
That is something to ponder upon, actually, and that is something that kind of comes in as as an add-on of the kind of heightened buzzing of how geopolitical competition actually plays into the domestic polity, as you previously mentioned.
Yeah, that what the other time also, while speaking in a public forum, I said that too much emphasis on the territoriality will not do service to us. We'll never become bigger or larger than either India or China. So too much of this focus on territoriality is not serving our interest.
It would not add to any benefit to us, basically. Yeah. So as we near the end, you hold the position currently of the executive director of IFA. And as you speak about how, institutions have to be sort of institutional structures have to be revised as times change and sociopolitical realities change. How have you observed IFA's role in the development of the nation's foreign policy? And to add on to that, you've taken several initiatives since you've assumed the position. So in lieu of that, what do you think can the institution contribute further and under what conditions?
Well, first thing is because of my long background in civil service, I always choose to remain grounded. That's all. So the first thing I always say is that IFA should drop any academic pretension whatsoever. We are not academic institution. We don't create knowledge. We may work with larger society, even with academia, to disseminate the knowledge, or more to bring down that knowledge to the policy world. My foremost challenge now in IFA is that is how to properly institutionalize it. After 26 years of its inception, still we have to lay proper legal and policy framework to conduct its day-to-day business. And my focus now is more on that area also. And also some other internal things, like we have been training the young officials of our ministry for the last many years. But so far, we don't have a standard curriculum. I'm trying to work on the standard curriculum and different level of standard curriculum. Always the focus will be to train the young, new entrant officers, because it's most challenging and it's most fulfilling, and also it is most necessary thing. But then again, building upon that, the curriculum at other levels also. So my more focus now is towards this internal thing. So I'm looking inward more, but it doesn't mean that I will not look outward. I will continue with all the programs and all the seminars and publications that I had been doing. But I have to. And another area where I have distinctly tried to concentrate my energies to that, IFA should evolve as a forum to increase communication between policy world and the academic world. Here, I have seen in Nepal, at least at the realm of international relations, the academic world do not understand the policy world that much. And the policy world have not been able to learn or receive the inputs from academic world that much. So one of the big challenge for an organization like IFA is how to further increase this communication between this academic world and policy world. So this is also one of the area that I'm trying to focus in. Thank you.
Right. Thank you. And I resonate with a lot of points that you've made today. So as we end this interview, we've touched upon a lot of different points today. We've, I think, sort of traversed through your journey together, and it was our pleasure to do so. I sincerely hope that we can actually touch on, because you've raised some very interesting points from leading from the rhetorics to the institutional structures, to the regional scope and the other issues like labor migration that sort of is very, very important for Nepal, and how institutions can and should respond to it, can better their responses to it. So these are very interesting points. And I hope that we can have, I think, one more session to sort of delve deeper into these points later on. So thank you so much, sir. And we wish you all the best for your endeavors within IFA. And we look forward to everything that you do and everything that you bring into the world of policy and academia from the institution that you serve.
Thank you very much, Swetaji. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. It's always nice to talk to you. And also one point that I would like to say, thanks, Ida, for hosting me, for you and Ida for hosting me. We think tanks, we are different think tanks working in the area of foreign policy in Nepal. Actually, we should also try to work together at least to better identify the role of the think tanks in a country like Nepal.
Thank you, sir. That is a point for the next discussion as well. I think we can discuss about this.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much for being here. And thank you to everyone who tuned into this conversation till end. Until next time, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.